Hi, everyone. Happy to see you all and hope you managed to join us today for the one of the webinar series, which is webinar on grants. So I will be sharing my screen right now and going to be talking about what are we, first of all, doing at SeedStars and who am I? So my name is Eugenia and I'm a growth program manager and acceleration program manager at SeedStars. So I'm happy to welcome you here today, and you can use the comment section to put where you're joining from. I know that from some countries it's super early, from some countries it's a little bit late. So make sure you put in the comments like where you joining from. So right now, talking about SeedStars. So what we do at SeedStars, number one, we have a part which is a SeedStars community. This is where we partner with governments, development agencies, and corporates to run the programs, acceleration academies, to grow startups and to support startups in emerging markets. And number two is SeedStars investment part, is where we invest in high growth companies in impactful sectors, tech-based, in emerging markets. So on this slide, I show you like some stats, and if you're following us every week, you might already know that, for example, we have more than 1,200 mentors in our community. We invested in 75 companies in emerging markets, and let's say we have quite a range of contacts and the network in emerging markets. Regarding the webinars, and this is webinar number 5 already, and this is on grants, and I hope you're following us every week. If not, if you missed any of the webinars you see, you can go on our landing page and see all the recordings there. So we are putting there every week the recording of the webinar, and today we're talking about grants. We have an amazing panel of speakers today. And I'm actually very honored to moderate this webinar because we have such an amazing individuals as Grace Kim, Program Manager from Development Innovation Ventures at USAID. We have Malcolm Spence, Managing Director and Global Innovation Fund. And we will welcome Jussi Hinkanen, CEO of Fuzoo. Quickly, about the agenda. So we will get the first perspective from USAID and Global Innovation Fund on a grants topic. Then we will go into the startup perspective and we will talk to Jussi about it. And then by the end of the session, we will have a Q&A. So actually, it's not necessarily by the end of the session. If you want to drop your comments in the chat, you can do it anytime. So every time the speaker will be speaking and something comes into your mind, feel free to drop the questions right there. And without further ado, I think we can proceed with the first speaker, who's Grace Kim. And just as short introduction, that Grace Kim is a program manager and development innovation ventures. It's a USAID evidence-based open innovation grant program. So Grace was conducting due diligence and managing multi-year grants. And also Grace has led the Venture Assistant Program since 2017. And this program provides advisory support to the ever-changing needs and challenges that grantees face. They operate when they operate and when they scale their innovations. So Grace, I would be super happy to welcome you, and you're here already. Nice to see you. How are you doing today?
Thank you for the great introduction. It's great to be back at SeedStars. I think I was in Lausanne maybe 4 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. I can't remember, but thank you for inviting me.
Nice. Yeah, well, Lausanne, we're missing this time of the global summits, and hopefully they will come back after pandemic. That's very true. So I'm giving this virtual floor to you, and well, let's go right into it.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Grace Kim here. I'm a program manager at Development Innovation Ventures. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And this program, all of our team members are based in Washington, D.C. But we are an open innovation evidence-based grant program. It's a mouthful, but there is a reason why we use these terminologies to kind of be a little bit more specific about what we're looking for in terms of like the types of innovations and organizations that we're looking to fund. So I think by nature of Seed Stars focusing only on entrepreneurs in emerging markets, there are a lot of like synergies between the Seed Stars entrepreneurs and the types of organizations that we're searching for when it comes to great organizations that, you know, we'd like to fund. But we focus on innovative solutions that improve the livelihoods of those who live in extreme poverty. And the only catch is that the program or the innovation needs to be implemented in a USAID operating country. And so that's kind of like the one limitation that, you know, people should think about. Next slide. So just to give you like an overview of our program. So we've been around since 2010. So we're going in our 11th year. We receive about 1,200 applications a year on average. And in our 10 years, we've given over 250 grants that total up to about now $170 million. And we funded programs in over 47 different countries. And so just to give you a little bit more data on like context for this audience, 36% of our grantees, so out of the 250 plus projects that we funded, 36% are private sector organizations, 53% are new to USAID, so organizations that have never received USAID grants, and 23% are under 30. So I'm making an assumption that generally Seed Stars entrepreneurs might be a little bit on the younger side, and so just sharing some data point on that one. Next slide. So what do we mean by innovation? So it depends. I think Malcolm from GIF might have a different definition, but at USAID and particularly DIV, we look for either new products or services or technology. It could be a new way of delivering an existing, business or existing solution. It could be apps. I know that now that we're in the mobile age, a lot of solutions involve some sort of a mobile app, but I don't want us to be labeled as everything needs to be tech or everything has to have some sort of like mobile component. We do fund a lot of behavioral interventions, like solutions that require some form of behavioral change. So whether it's a nutrition program or teaching teachers a different methodology of teaching young children how to read or recognize like numbers or letters or shapes or things like that for basic education. We do fund a lot of impact evaluations that are behavioral interventions. Next slide. So 3 main principles, and this is kind of like our selection criteria. One is rigorous evidence of impact. And what we mean by that is, we don't expect private sector companies to be running randomized control trials, but when you present your proposal to us and say you have this great way, a new way of doing something, we would like to see some sort of evidence, track record of why your solution is better than what's already out there. And we can get more, deeper into that during Q&A if you have questions about that. The second thing we look for is cost effectiveness. Obviously, we're not going to fund something that's going to cost, that is unaffordable for people who live in developing countries. And then third is pathway to scale and sustainability. And so whether you, obviously, I think for Seed Stars audience, we'd want to know how you're going to cover costs and break even at a very minimum, right? And then we look for, even for stage 1, like $200,000 investments, grants, we do look for, hey, does this solution or organization have a pathway to scale, right? That's going to be sustainable. So, if it's something that's going to perpetually require donor funding or philanthropy, right, to subsidize growth, then likely not a good fit for us. But if you are going to have a paying government partner, for example, then that's a different story. So we can get into the details of that. So there's 3 levels of funding for us actually there's 4 categories. Stage 1 is up to $200,000, usually piloting. Stage 2 is up to $1.5 million. It's like testing and positioning for scale. And stage 3 is up to $15 million, and that's transitioning to scale, or usually regional, national scaling, or going into a different country. We do have a 4th category, called evidence grants, and it's up to $1.5 million, and it's for organizations, could be private sector companies or other organizations, where if you already have a solution that's been in market for a long time, but you just don't have the evidence to show that it has some sort of like societal impact, development impact, then you can apply for a grant to do that kind of like rigorous study. Next slide. And just quickly, application timeline. We accept applications 365 days a year. It takes about 1 to 2 months for us to get back to you after like an initial screening to say whether or not you're going to move into diligence or not. Diligence takes typically 2 to 5 months. Obviously, if you're asking for stage 3, more than $1 million funding, we're going to spend a lot more time doing due diligence versus a $200,000 stage 1 pilot kind of proposal. And then we are the US government. It takes a lot of paperwork to actually make that award. And so it takes about another 2 to 5 months to actually get through all of the background checks and the paperwork and whatnot to make the award. So our program document is called an annual program statement. It spells out like what we look for, what our program does, evaluation criteria, etc. So you can look that up on the URL that was provided, and then the application portal you can find on usaid.gov/div/apply.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you for these like short and condensed insights. Very useful for us. I was just also looking in the chat. If you can just recap a little bit of the eligibility criteria. I understand that this country needs to be like with the USAID, right? But just if you can recap for the viewers.
Yeah, so we only give grants. So it can't be an individual. You have to be an organization. So we don't give grant funding to an individual. It could be a nonprofit. It could be a university. It could be a private sector company. It could. We don't really have anything except for like you can't be an individual applying for a grant. What else? The innovation needs to be post-prototype, so we don't fund ideas. So that's, you go to an incubator for that kind of stuff, that kind of funding. Because we say we are an evidence-based program, at the very least, we would prefer to even for a stage 1 pilot, for applicants to come to us, having tested their innovation somewhere, right? It could be with 50 people, 100 people, not, thousands of people, but, to give us some sort of like evidence that like maybe you can do a before and after comparison of what your innovation does, right? To give us some form of evidence for that. What else? Eligibility criteria. I think that's pretty much it.
Well, yeah, that's, I think, very helpful. And thank you for sharing the websites and the documents. So I think we will also drop it in the chat. And thank you so much, Grace, for presenting right now. And we will see you for the Q&A. So we will chat back in the end of the session. Thank you so much, Grace. So thank you, everyone who tuned in. So we just chatted to Grace from USAID and Development Innovation Ventures. So right now I wanted to welcome on stage Malcolm, who is a managing director at Global Innovation Fund. And he's also a development economist with experience working in Africa, Uganda, Ethiopia, Zambia. And also he's responsible for sourcing and assessing and managing innovations with the public sector pathway to scale it at the Global Innovation Fund. So with that said, I'm going to be inviting Malcolm here. Hi, Malcolm.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
How is it going for you today?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks. I'm in London. The sun is shining.
Nice. Nice. London is always good. So I think we can dive right into it. So regarding the slides, you can see them on the screen, and we can move on, Malcolm.
Excellent. Well, thanks once again for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to talk a little bit about the Global Innovation Fund. And there's a lot of synergies between what we do at Global Innovation Fund and Development Innovation Ventures. And I want to use my presentation today just to elaborate a little bit more on the philosophy which underpins our investment criteria and what we're really trying to achieve. So firstly, the Global Innovation Fund is a non-profit social innovation funder. We're headquartered here in the UK, and we've got offices in Washington, DC and Nairobi also. And we partner with aid agencies to employ a venture approach to global development programs. So what that means, and this is the simplest way to think about our investment thesis, is that we are here to try and find and fund development innovations which we think should be more widely practiced in international development. So like DIV, we're looking for innovations which we think can be more impactful for people living in poverty, or more cost effective, or more likely to succeed at scale than the current business as usual. So we are funded by some of the world's biggest and best bilateral aid agencies, including those from the US, UK, Canada, Sweden, and Australia, as well as some corporate entities and independent foundations. And they invest in us so that we can unearth the highest potential innovations and use our capital to prove them out, to generate evidence on their effectiveness and put in place more of the conditions required for them to scale. So in this way, we talk about using our capital to de-risk an innovation and thereby increase the probability that it will be taken to scale and it can succeed at scale. So like the IV, we have a staged funding process whereby the amount of capital that we can deploy is linked to the existing evidence base for that innovation and how far along the pathway to scale that a given innovation is at the point that we consider it for investment. So typically organizations use our investments to generate evidence, and this is both evidence of the likely impact for beneficiaries, but also evidence on the proof points which underpin the scaling thesis. So some of the operational evidence about the viability for success at scale. One of the ways in which that we are different from DIV is that we can deploy a wider range of instruments, so including risk capital instruments, debt, equity, convertible instruments, as well as grants. So this is something I'll circle back to and talk about briefly with some of the things that we take into account when choosing the right instrument. Our website has an open innovation portal, which is always open. We don't have specific calls or deadlines, so you're welcome to apply at any time. And I just wanted to focus on these 4 kind of investment criteria that we've shaped as 4 key questions for you to consider in terms of thinking if GIF is the right fit for you, but also in terms of how to position your application to the Global Innovation Fund. So the first thing is about the problem definition. GIF is open to innovations in any sector, but we want to direct our capital towards innovations which are specifically targeting some of the biggest challenges in international development. Your innovation must be expected to bring people living in poverty, bring benefits to people living in poverty. And while it's really imperative that it's been informed by a deep understanding of the local context, we're also looking at innovations which have some relevance to the wider international development community. Often I think of innovation funding as the process of buying answers to important questions. So what is the important question that you're trying to answer with your innovation? The next thing is innovation. How is my solution different? So we don't fund business as usual. So it might be that your business or your project is doing something which is extremely impactful and successful, but if it's already the norm in that sector, then for us, we wouldn't consider it to be an innovation, and we're not likely to be the right funder for you. So it's really important to consider and be explicit about the ways in which your innovation differs from what else is going on in the marketplace. The next question is evidence. And, this is something that Grace said, that I think for me, the simplest way to think about evidence is, why do I believe that my innovation is better? Our investment decisions are informed by what we know works from the wider international development literature, but also the findings from the innovator themselves. So I think it's important to reflect upon, what are the reasons to believe in this innovation? Why do you think that your innovation can succeed? And how can you back it up? What are the proof points from the literature or from the marketplace or from your own experience today? And then lastly, scale. So this is a question about how will it go big? So the focus on scale means that we are also interested in cost effectiveness, that the conditions in the market, or that there is a willingness to pay on the part of the consumers or a government partner. And a key part of our due diligence is assessing the operational, political, as well as the financial feasibility of achieving scale. This is one of the areas where our criteria are a bit different when making risk capital versus grant investments. So for risk capital investments, we're obviously looking at market conditions and commercial feasibility, which means that a business can grow and expand its reach and expand its impact. But for grant investments, we often talk about a public sector pathway to scale. And this is where we expect that an innovation will ultimately be taken on by a public sector entity. So in education, for instance, some of the grants that are in our portfolio already are working with education authorities to absorb and integrate the practices that have been proven out and de-risked with our grants. We also have some grants where this kind of public sector pathway to scale is achieved through adoption by the World Bank or UNHCR or some other multilateral agency. And I'll be happy to give some examples from our portfolio if we've got time through the Q&A. But before I conclude, I just wanted to cover the point on this current slide, which is about some important considerations for Global Innovation Fund when it comes to awarding grants to for-profit entities, as I know that that's something that's kind of most relevant for the Seed Stars community. So the first thing to say is that, we're a UK charity and we're regulated by UK charity laws. And what that means basically is, first and foremost, our grant must lead to some charitable benefit, some public benefit. So we can't really use our grants if the goal is purely commercial growth. There needs to be some tangible public benefit that comes to that, and any private benefits must be proportionate to the outcomes and impacts that we're interested in. And because we have the discretion to award risk capital investments, whether debt or equity or convertible investments, we might find that that's a more appropriate way to go when you have a revenue model rather than providing a grant, which might be distortionary when you're in the marketplace. There are, however, just to conclude, there are some circumstances when we can give a grant to for-profits, and that's when the focus is on a public benefit. So it might be that you're creating a public good, a resource which will benefit everyone in the marketplace, including your competitors and government. It's not just for your business. Or it might be you're working directly with government to support them to improve their provision of services. Or lastly, we can award a grant to undertake evaluation activity, which generates new knowledge on how to improve outcomes for people living in poverty. Of course, in the course of the Q&A, I'm happy to give some examples of where applications typically fall down on these criteria, and happy to answer any questions that you've got. But for now, I'll leave it there. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Thank you for sharing. The question I have in my mind is also thank you for mentioning that we have mostly startups and for-profit organizations who are in our network and are really interested to learn about it. We were also curious about the part of kind of the mixed capital, the combination between, let's say, equity and grant in the cap tables of startups. Do you have any opinion on that? Should you apply for grants for 3 years and then just think about venture capital, equity stuff, or anything you have on this matter?
Yeah, so that is something that we have done, and there are examples of that of our portfolio. So typically what we would do in that instance is use the grant capital to prove out some of the key assumptions on commercial viability. So that could be research on the market conditions or the willingness to pay of your consumers. But ideally, those proof points would be revenue. So we would use that so rather than having some we would want to test the hypothesis that there is a customer that's willing to pay, and that this can ultimately lead to a commercially viable enterprise. So yeah, because we have the discretion to use a wide variety of instruments, we're always quite keen to flex those muscles and think creatively about what the right instrument is for a given innovation, depending on where it is in the trajectory.
I see. Well, thank you. And the last question from my end is more on the how do you work with the startups and companies like post grants? Like, what do you do for your portfolio companies?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, Global Innovation Fund, we carry expertise. I think first and foremost, because we are not only a grant maker but an impact investor, that means that we carry an expertise in social enterprise and risk capital instruments and business development that's not necessarily found in other grant makers. So we are willing to provide technical support to our grantees, whether directly ourselves or by providing resources within the grant for them to procure the expertise that they need. We also have access to a community of experts that we open up to organizations in our portfolio, whereby if they're dealing with a particular challenge, we can pay for them to procure expertise that might help them to overcome that particular challenge. And then we also have a bit of a discretionary budget to support organizations in our portfolio to deal with unforeseen circumstance, whether it's a critical risk that they're facing in the pathway to scale or an opportunity. So we've provided additional top-up funding for organizations to develop their scale model or publicize their work, for instance. So those are the three main ways in which that we provide additional support to organizations once they're in our portfolio.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. It was really interesting chatting, and we're not saying goodbye for sure because we will be having the part of Q&A, and I saw there are even questions in the comment section, but we will get back to it in the end of the session, and Malcolm will stay with us. Thank you once again for the presentation, and I see you in a couple of minutes. Right now, I wanted also to remind you that, of course, you can drop your questions in the chat. And I see like Joseph De Leon, thank you so much for your question. We will get back to it closer to the end of the session where all the speakers will be on stage and we will address every question you put in the chat. Right now, we will follow with the speaker on our end from the starter perspective. We have Juicy, who is the CEO of Fuzoo, which is an online job platform focused on connecting job seekers and employers in East Africa. And as Juicy is a software and strategy professional with 15+ years on the ground experience across African markets, and he worked with a lot of multinational companies to make his startup grow. And I would like to invite on this stage Juicy, if you hear us. Hi, nice to see you. Nice to see you today. Hello.
I hope
Thank you very much, Juicy, for joining. It's really a pleasure to see you. So also, Fuzoo is a Seedstars portfolio company, and we would love to learn from you your perspective on grants. And I will give you this virtual floor so we can go ahead.
Thank you, Eugenia, and great to be here. And feel very proud to be a member of the Seedstars family. So what I'm going to cover here is briefly tell you about what we do at Fuzoo, and then to try to give you the perspective of Fuzoo when it comes to then grants and different forms of non-dilutive funding. So let's kick it off. So Fuzoo is a company. If you go to the next slide, so Fuzoo is a company that whose mission is to prepare people and organizations for success. And what that essentially means is we focus on career development, recruitment, and online learning solutions for emerging markets, end users, and organizations. You can see there on the right, you can see the map of Fuzoo. So we have a few team members sitting in Europe, in Finland, and developers in Ukraine and Estonia. And then we have bulk of our team sitting on the ground in Kenya, Uganda, and Nigeria. We are at the moment about 70 people with very diverse backgrounds from organizations like Microsoft and Nokia and McKinsey and World Bank and United Nations and Bain and the company and the likes. And we are just about to launch Fuzoo in Nigeria over the next few weeks. The problem that we focus on is really, we feel that it's one of the top 3 challenges that the African continent in particular is facing. We know that Africa has the world's youngest population base, but what's also interesting, of course, is that while the population grows, also the working age population grows. And over the next 15 years alone, we're going to be adding about 500 million people to the African workforce, Africa becoming a bigger job market than India or, for example, China is. And what's noteworthy is that big part of these people do not get access to any type of career counseling or support. They haven't had access to professional education and very often don't also have any type of support structures around them. And basically to this challenge, we are developing then a fully digital solution that can scale to then tens of millions of people. So we focus on 3 different type of products. So we have the career builder or the job seeker facing solution that is an artificial intelligence based platform that then customizes the user experience, the content, the advice, everything you see on the platform as per who you are. Secondly, we have then the Fuzoo employer solution, which is then tool for finding the right type of talent that fits the needs of your organization. Again, for anyone from micro level organizations all the way then to big multinationals. And third pillar, what we have is something what we call Fuzoo program. And Fuzoo program allows us to build sort of really high scale youth employment or employability programs that can support then, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people to find their place in the job market and to provide them with more bespoke and more customized services, career coaching support, one-on-one support, and so forth. So these are the 3 lines what we are operating in. The core hypothesis what we have with our career builder proposition is that we understand that most of our users enter platforms like Fuzoo to find employment or to improve their level of income. But we at the same time understand that these people, not many of them are ready for the job market. So we then try to support them throughout the journey, essentially providing them with an opportunity to get highly accurate recommendations, as well as then provide them with access to learning solutions, career coaching, inspirational content, peer support, and much more. Everything customized to who these people are and what things they need. So if we then go to the Fuzoo's history with non-dilutive funding, which has been very important for Fuzoo. I wouldn't say that we are massively successful in acquiring non-dilutive funding, but I think that it still has played an important role in Fuzoo's journey. And I would divide it into 4 different areas. And so first one, the market exploration grants, essentially funding that helped us initially to figure out and test out the service on the ground in East Africa, prototyping, and then eventually launching the service. So this, in combination with an equity-based funding, was really critical for us to get our operations off the ground. The second thing that has been really important for us are different type of R&D grants, product development grants, and debt. So combination of the 2, a bit more on the debt side than on the grant side, but really we are building a highly technical solution requiring a lot of R&D and kind of world-leading technology solutions, which means that it's pretty expensive. So this has been critical for us to really test out and take sort of big bets in terms of, for example, AI, machine learning development, and so forth. Then the third area that has been important for us are the different type of scale-up grants and debt. And this is, again, mostly focusing on the debt side and helping us then to complement the equity-based investments and to help us out in expanding to new markets and supporting, for example, launches. And then technology grants, not to forget different type of grants that help us to subsidize server costs, licensing grants, and so forth. So if I then summarize it, why is this funding critical for us? First of all, of course, it's always been important for us to enter a market, but also then to extend the runway that we get from equity-based funding and the revenue we generate as an organization. The second thing that's important for us is that historically their valuation levels have been relatively low. It depends a little bit on the category you're in. If you, at the moment you're looking at fintech companies, of course the valuations are crazy high, but there are a lot of categories that are still pretty low valued, which means that you cannot get enough equity capital from the market to really grow and to invest in your expansion. So it's been important to complement this funding. Thirdly, it's been great for risk mitigation. And so when we are testing out new concepts, we are searching for the product market fit and so on. So this type of funding has been really important. And then fourthly, entering into market segments that may not be commercially viable initially. Different type of projects or a different type of grant funding has facilitated our expansion to this type of areas. And a good example is that currently we are running for the largest career development and learning and employment platform in East Africa for persons with disabilities, and something like this wouldn't be possible without this type of approach. I try to sort of skip some of the comments there, but I'd say that all in all, this type of actors very often also help us out also with the public relations and in connecting us with different partners and so forth. So all in all, the benefits are very, very clear. If we then go to the challenges for a second, because of course every type of funding comes also with challenges, and I need to be very clear here that these comments are not about USAID or Global Innovation Fund, but just observations generally after having worked and after having looked at this ecosystem from the startup viewpoint, or multinational viewpoint, from a tech hub viewpoint, from funders viewpoint, and these are some of the things what I have seen over the years. The first one there is that sometimes there is a sentiment that different funds have very specific selection criteria, or that they are not always fully transparent in the way that they are making choices, and sometimes it's difficult to understand that why a certain idea went through. And what you also then learn sometimes is that there are some level of either geographic or the historical then links there to the grantees themselves. So something that has been more maybe an issue in the past, but still noteworthy. The second one then is sometimes there is a bit of a I would say non-innovative and traditional mindset of the grantors. So very often sort of focusing on ways of working that and innovations that are potentially not the cutting edge when it comes to technology, because there of course are more proof points about the old way of doing things. And so sometimes it is difficult to find grantors who have this really sort of forward-looking mindset, and I'm really glad to hear today about DIV's and GIF's focus. That's essentially what they are both are about. The third risk sometimes with this type of funding, of course, is that if it's poorly allocated, it also then may actually hinder the market for growing. And so then it becomes a market distortion or even a distraction. And there are a few examples, even in our own space, where this has been the case, where sometimes capital that is injected in certain actors may then even destroy or at least distract the market itself. So therefore, very important, of course, to have a clear criteria for the selection. From the company's viewpoint, one thing to always keep in mind is that the funding that you go after, it needs to be focused on what your core essence is about. That sort of helps you to take your operations to the next level and not to divert your focus and attention to something that is secondary. And so sometimes I have seen this happen. So where companies then start diverting their attention to way too many areas, and then they kind of forget the core. And then, of course, the last thing is that the timelines are relatively lengthy. So when you are thinking about grant-based funding, it's important to take into consideration that it's going to take quite a bit of time, both from senior management, but also then calendar-wise. So expect it to take often 6 to 12 months before you see tangible results. So those were just some sort of short remarks about what Fuzoo is about, and yeah. Any questions, Junior, you have? I'm ready.
Thank you so much, Josie, for giving this perspective of advantages and challenges. I think it's very, first of all, interesting and useful for the audience who is watching. And also we have in our network startups who are maybe planning to raise the grant, but also looking at the venture capital option. So my question would be how to build this balance between grants and venture capital, and how was it for you to kind of create and manage this mix of a capital?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I don't think that there is sort of let's say there's an answer that's, of course, there's no answer that's that's applicable to everyone, but I would say that particularly when you're focusing on sectors and let's say categories of products that do not yet have the attention of the equity investors, and we know that that's, even though if you look at for example African continent, the equity investments have been growing very rapidly over the past years, but still you can say that bulk of the funding is going to a few key sectors, e-commerce, fintech, logistics, and there's not that much still capital going to anything else. Agriculture has been growing, of course, quite well as well, but there are a lot of sectors that don't attract this type of funding, which then means that the valuation levels and the appetite for investors is relatively low. And so if you are in one of these sectors, I think grant funding and different type of non-dilutive funding is critical. If I look at Fuzoo in particular, if you look at the global competition and the amount of capital required for building something like what we are doing, my own gut feeling is that we would need to be having sort of 50-50 type of funding optimally. So 50% coming from equity instruments, equity-based instruments, and then 50% coming from grants or some form of from maybe repayable grants or debt instruments. So that would be, in my mind, the optimal balance. Hopefully, in the future, it's more and more going to equity-based direction. But considering again the diversity of the context we operate in, and how much investment you need on platform side and team side, I think that type of mix would be optimal in my mind.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jussi. Yeah, it makes sense. I know that there is no right answer to that, but we really appreciate your perspective. Thank you very much. I think it very much makes sense. We will see you in a couple of minutes, or actually, I think we can even bring all the speakers right now, and we will go right into the Q&A part. And we already have gathered some questions, so we will not be fishing for them. So thank you once again, Malcolm and Grace, for joining us once again. So we have a couple of questions, and I will try to kind of distribute it to see how we can better answer all of them. So Malcolm, I would probably address one of the questions to you firstly about the one of the viewers is asking blended finance. So what are the pitfalls on blind spots?
Yeah, I think the challenge is always to get the right instrument for where you are in your journey as an innovator, and making sure that the kind of capital that you're taking on is the right for that stage in your investment. So with blended finance, one of the pitfalls that I've seen is that if there is an injection of grant capital, it can, as Jussi has said, it can distort the incentives, and it can mean that it's more appealing for an innovator or an entrepreneur to apply for a grant capital that might take several months, as Jussi has pointed out, but can lead to a check for $50,000, $20,000, $100,000, and that might be more appealing than doing the hard graft of building the market base. So that is something that can be distortionary. So I think that for you as an entrepreneur in your business, it's about getting the incentive structure right for you and your company, so that the focus is on building your customer base and getting the proving out the viability of the revenue streams that you think are most suitable for you. Take advice, look at comparators in the marketplace, talk to lots of people, and form your own view, and don't be led necessarily by the investor who might have a different set of preferences to your own.
Well, we're back. Everything is good. Sorry for that. Go ahead, Malcolm. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I've concluded my reflections on that. I don't know if Grace or Yusi want to add anything.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Grace, I actually have a question for you, which is more on the KPI measurements of the impact. So you've mentioned that you also have a look at that. So what would
Yeah.
that be?
So thank you for that question. And I think it dovetails to what Malcolm just said, of, maybe some for-profit companies who receive grant funding to get distracted or maybe even lazy, right? And not doing the hard work. But the way our grants are structured is, say if it's a $200,000 or even a $5 million grant, we don't just release $5 million or $200,000 at this once we sign the agreement. What we do is we develop, co-create milestones. So these are like specific, I guess, deliverables. You can consider, if we could use that terminology. And generally, we work with the applicant to define what those key milestones should be in order to set the organization up for success. So if it's a for-profit company, then obviously we would put some revenue targets as KPIs. We would probably put some sort of customer acquisition growth rates as KPIs, right? Like things that would be applicable to that organization. Actually, not even just for profits, right? It could be a nonprofit that has a revenue generating program, product, service that they're deploying. And so even for nonprofits, we would put those types of business metrics into the milestones, just to make sure that the organization is actually making the impact, reaching scale, etc. Other KPIs, we are again, US government, we like to count how many people are actually benefiting from this intervention. So if it's an ag tech type of fintech, it could be ed tech, not only the number of people who subscribe to that service, but those around them who would actually benefit from that subscription of service or product. So typically we look at, also follow-on funding, has USAID's grant to your organization been catalytic to attract more investors, right? And so that's kind of something that Juicy had talked about, where some of the grants that Fuzoo has received was helped de-risk investments from traditional impact investors. And so we do like to look at that metric to see how impactful USAID's funding has been to that organization.
Yeah, thank you very much, Grace. And on your end, Josie, this part of an impact and gathering all this data on KPIs on impact side, how challenging was it to apply for grant from this perspective? Or it's something?
Yeah, it's a very, very, very good question, and very timely question as well. I think that in our case, one sort of good thing has been that because Fuzoo is based on a very sort of intricate and very detailed data architecture. So we collect data about everything that happens on the platform. So we know what people do there. We know how they advance, in the application processes. So we know the learning results, and so it's very easy for us to track the behavior and therefore then to convert that into tangible KPIs that's kind of tell us whether we are generating impact or not. So in our case, it's been pretty easy. I'd say that the difficult one there is to agree on which of what are kind of the definitions for each of those metrics and what is acceptable. For example, let's think about how much does it cost to employ an individual. Is that something that we can agree on, or what would be considered as a foundation for scale? And so the traditional employability initiatives, they very often have have been spending thousands of US dollars for one person to find employment, whereas then what we are trying to look at is how can we get that to a level of 10, 20 US dollars or even less. And so sometimes that's been causing a bit of back and forth. But yeah, I'd say I don't see that as such a big issue. So based on our work with actors like DG, actors like UK8, the Nordic ones and so forth, as well as then actors like Rockefeller and so forth, it hasn't really been an issue. As long as you have high quality data and you can prove where that data is from, it's pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Jussi. Yeah, well, very much agree. And another question we have on the comments, and I see it from also Joseph De Leon, and I think, Malcolm, we will direct it to you. In terms of venture bridge funding, what's a fair rate, and what happens if the social enterprise can't pay back?
Yeah, I was really hoping that you wouldn't come to me with that question because it's particularly tricky. What's a fair rate? It's the rate that your business can comfortably absorb and within your comfort zone. So one of the reasons that the Global Innovation Fund was created is recognizing that some of the existing lenders within the market were perhaps demanding a financial rate of return that perhaps wasn't viable for a lot of social enterprises that are also trying to do the very difficult business of achieving impact for marginalized groups at the same time. So we do, consider risk capital investments to be, concessional or patient, at a rate which is perhaps not achievable in the existing marketplace. And that's where we think that we derive a lot of our additionality. In terms of what happens, and if you're unable to repay, then I think that this is where you have to be very simultaneously assured within your business model. And just to add to what Grace has said on the KPIs that are most important for you, I think when you're starting out, it's really important to look at the unit economics of your business. What is the unit cost of me achieving X amount of impact? What is the opportunity for me to achieve cost efficiencies as I scale? And are there boundaries to scale? Can I continue to deliver the same amount of impact as that innovation grows? I think that kind of analysis is really, really important for you to be able to get comfortable with the debt that you're taking on and the scenarios that might play out with respect to how things go. A Global Innovation Fund, the last 18 months with the pandemic has been, a very, very difficult time to do business in developing economies. And we've been very supportive of our businesses that are within our portfolio through that period in a way that we would like to think that other investors may not be. So I think there's an argument there as well, not only to think about the terms, but like where you're taking the capital from is also an important consideration.
Absolutely. Well, this question came to you, but thank you very much for this also elaborated answer. I think we will be slightly going to the wrapping up the session, and I will be quickly sharing my screen once again, so we can go into the last touches of this amazing grant session. So first of all, like potential grant providers is for the audience to have a look at. So we had speakers from USAID, who is Grace Kim, and Global Innovation Fund. Thank you very much, Malcolm. And the rest you can also consider to go on their websites and dig more into the eligibility criteria and see if you can apply for any of those grants. And 1 second about the next week webinar. The webinar is going to be on venture debt. It's quite a unique topic, and there are not a lot of companies that are providing venture debt in emerging markets. So we're going to be having Sebastian as a moderator from investment team. And of course, 2 amazing speakers, Gina Valle, managing a partner and Abound Capital, and Carolina Castillo as a growth manager from A55. So this is my 50 cents for the end of the session. We will be welcoming you here, but we are going to be closing the session right now, but we can stay for any final comments you have. So let me stop sharing my screen. In case you also have any questions like beyond this webinar, you can always reach out to myself, to speakers, we are open to answer any question you might have in terms of like applying for grants or anything you would require for us. The team will place all the links in the chats, like for the previous webinars and for this one as well. It's going to be recorded and shared with you. So thank you very much, Malcolm, Grace, and Juicy, for being today with me. It's been such a pleasure for me and an honor, first of all, to moderate an amazing session with you. And thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.